In the spring of Echenbabai 6 women gave birth within 14 months on a Virginia plantation. All 6 delivered healthy boys with identical physical characteristics, unusual height for infants, distinctive amber-colored eyes, and a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon on their left shoulders. The births were recorded in a private family ledger, never in any county register. The attending physician noted in his journal that he'd never seen such consistent genetic features across half-siblings in 30 years of practice. All 6 mothers were daughters of the same woman, a plantation widow named Helena Ravenswood. And according to whispered accounts from household staff, all 6 children shared the same father, a man listed in the estate's property inventory as item number 47. The Ravenswood plantation stretched across 2,000 acres of Virginia soil, 20 miles south of Richmond. By Echenbabai, it operated with 73 enslaved people, producing tobacco that supplied markets as far north as Baltimore. Helena Ravenswood had been born Helena Pritchard in Echenbabai. She married Edmund Ravenswood in Echenbabai Arcers, bringing a substantial dowry that modernized the plantation's operations. The couple had 6 daughters in rapid succession: Virginia, Caroline, Elizabeth, Margaret, Catherine, and Sarah. Between Echenbabai and Echenbabai, Edmund had wanted sons desperately to inherit the plantation and carry forward the family name. After Sarah's birth, Helena suffered complications that made further pregnancies impossible. Edmund never quite forgave her for this, though he never spoke of it directly. Edmund died in December, Echenbabai, thrown from his horse during a fox hunt. He was 49 years old. He left behind a will that granted Helena control of the entire estate, until one of his daughters married a man deemed suitable to assume management. Helena was 45 when she became a widow. Her daughters ranged in age from 16 to 25. Virginia and Caroline had received marriage proposals, but Edmund had rejected them all, finding fault with each suitor's lineage or financial prospects. The problem Helena faced was both immediate and existential. Under Virginia law, a woman could control property only as long as she remained unmarried or until a male heir came of age. Her daughters' marriages would transfer control to their husbands. The estate required someone capable of managing intensive tobacco cultivation, someone strong enough to maintain authority. But more than that, Helena had become obsessed with an idea about bloodlines, about breeding, about creating the perfect heir. She had spent countless hours in Edmund's study after his death, reading his agricultural journals, his breeding records for the plantation's horses and cattle. Edmund had been meticulous about improving livestock through selective pairing, noting which combinations produced the strongest animals. Helena began thinking about human breeding with the same calculated precision. There was a man named Isaac Drummond. He was 28 years old in Echenbabai, standing 6'4", with a build that came from years of blacksmith work. His parents had been sold south before he was old enough to remember them. Isaac could read, taught in secret by an elderly woman who had died the previous winter. He possessed what the overseer described as unusual intelligence and self-control. Isaac worked in the forge, creating and repairing tools, shoeing horses, making iron fittings for plantation operations. Edmund had valued his work enough to allow him a small cabin of his own rather than quarters in the common buildings. He had amber-colored eyes, unusual enough that people remarked on them, and a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon on his left shoulder. Helena had noticed Isaac years before Edmund's death, though not for any romantic inclination. She had noticed him the way Edmund noticed a promising colt. She watched how other enslaved people deferred to him despite having no official authority, how he moved with controlled strength, how he solved problems that baffled others. She noted his height, his health, his evident intelligence. 3 months after Edmund's burial, Helena began making unusual requests. She wanted detailed information about Isaac's daily routines, his health, his interactions with others. She requested that Dr. Silas Hartwick examine him under the pretense of ensuring the plantation's most valuable craftsman remained in good condition. Dr. Hartwick's report noted excellent health and superior physical development, and Helena gathered her daughters in the main parlor on a March evening in Echen Barbai Sishati. She spoke for nearly 2 hours, and not one of her daughters interrupted her. She began with practicalities, the estate's financial position, the legal vulnerabilities they faced as women without male protection, the declining marriage prospects they all understood but rarely acknowledged aloud. Then she presented her solution. She wanted grandsons, multiple grandsons born close enough in time to be raised together, educated together, prepared to inherit and manage the plantation as a collective. But these grandsons needed to be superior in every way, physically strong, mentally capable, healthy, resilient. To achieve this, Helena had concluded they needed a father who embodied those exact traits. And she had selected Isaac Drummond Langd. The silence that followed was broken by Caroline, asking if their mother had lost her mind. Helena responded by opening Edmund's breeding ledgers and walking them through 20 years of horse breeding records, showing how deliberate selection had improved the plantation stock from mediocre to exceptional. She used the language of agriculture, of rational improvement, of practical necessity. Virginia pointed out that what Helena proposed was illegal, immoral, and would destroy them socially if it became known. Helena agreed it must remain absolutely secret. The pregnancies could be attributed to brief marriages to men who died shortly after. Disease and accidents were common enough. The births would be recorded privately, and the children raised as orphaned relatives. And Elizabeth asked how Helena intended to force Isaac's cooperation. Helena's response revealed the depths of her calculation. She didn't intend to force anything. She intended to offer Isaac something that held more value than anything else could: legal manumission for himself and future freedom for his children, documented and guaranteed. And she would draw up papers promising his freedom after the last child was born. She would ensure his children were educated, that they grew up not as enslaved people but as heirs to the plantation. The cynicism of this offer was staggering. Helena understood that enslaved people had hopes and desires. She was offering to weaponize Isaac's natural desire for family and freedom against him. Margaret began to cry. Catherine stared at the floor. Sarah, the youngest at 16, asked if they had any choice. Helena's answer was honest in its brutality. They could refuse and watch the plantation decline, their prospects diminish, their security evaporate. Or they could participate in securing their future through the only means available. She gave them 3 days to decide. On the 3rd day, all 6 daughters agreed. Their reasons varied. Some framed it as duty, others as necessity, one simply as having no acceptable alternative. Helena's next step was approaching Isaac himself. She met with him in Edmund's study. The conversation was never recorded, but its outcome was clear. Within a week, construction began on a small cottage in a secluded area of the estate, screened by trees. The cottage had its own well, its own garden, and a level of comfort that would have been extraordinary for an enslaved person. Virginia was the first to move into the cottage in April. Echen Babai Sishirti. She remained there for 3 months before returning to the main house. The pattern repeated with mathematical precision. Each daughter spent approximately 3 months in the cottage, then returned. The intervals varied slightly, but the sequence followed birth order: Virginia, Caroline, Elizabeth, Margaret, Catherine, and finally Sarah. Mumdi household staff were reassigned or given tasks that kept them away from the cottage area. Supplies were delivered by Helena's trusted personal maid, Delia, who was promised her freedom upon completion of what Helena called the project. Dr. Hartwick began making regular visits, arriving every few weeks to check on the family's health. 8. What happened in that cottage over the following 18 months would remain one of the most carefully guarded secrets in Virginia history. A secret maintained through fear, complicity, and the understanding that exposure would destroy everyone involved. Munda Virginia delivered her son in January, Echen Babai Sisabat. Dr. Hartwick attended the birth, recording it in his private journal but nowhere else. The boy was healthy, with distinctive amber eyes and the crescent-shaped birthmark. Virginia named him Edmund after her father. Man Caroline gave birth in May, Echen Babai Siserba, Elizabeth in August, Margaret in December, Catherine in March, Echen Babai Siserjilt. Sarah, the youngest daughter, delivered her son in June, Echen Babai Siserjilt, just after her 19th birthday. Damjit 6 sons born to 6 sisters across 18 months. All bore the same physical markers. All were recorded in the private family ledger with their mother's names, but no father listed. Helena converted the entire 3rd floor of the main house into nursery and schoolrooms. She hired a tutor from Pennsylvania named Albert Grayson, who had no connections to Virginia society and asked no questions about the unusual family arrangement. She paid him 3 times the normal rate. The official story, spread through carefully selected social contacts, was that the daughters had each married briefly men who died in a yellow fever outbreak in Richmond. The story was plausible enough. Such outbreaks did occur. Helena even commissioned mourning jewelry for her daughters, lockets containing locks of hair from men who never existed. Mantazak remained in his cabin near the forge. He continued his blacksmith work, but witnesses recalled seeing him at unusual hours near the main house, speaking with Helena in the gardens, watching from a distance when the boys played in the yard. The promised manumission documents were prepared by a Richmond lawyer. The papers specified that Isaac would be freed on the 18th birthday of the youngest child, along with a deed to 40 acres. The children were to be freed at birth and recognized as heirs, with careful legal language establishing them as wards of Helena Ravenswood. Banji. It was an elaborate legal fiction, but it depended entirely on absolute secrecy. Being that secrecy began to crack in, Echen Babai Wooshers, a neighboring plantation owner named Richard Yancey, made a social call. During the visit, his daughter wandered into the 3rd floor nursery and saw the 6 boys being taught. She was struck by how much they resembled each other despite supposedly having different fathers. She mentioned this to her mother, who mentioned it to Richard, who found it curious enough to comment on at a tobacco auction. The whispers started quietly. Questions about the daughters' mysterious marriages. Questions about the remarkable similarity between the boys. Questions about why Helena kept such an isolated household. Helena responded by becoming even more reclusive, which only intensified speculation. She dismissed several household staff members she suspected of gossip. In Echen Babai Wusher one dismissed staff member, a woman named Pearl, began telling a different story about the children's origins. She told her sister that all 6 boys had the same father, and that father was an enslaved man on the Ravenswood estate. John Helena sent men to speak with Pearl. They informed her that spreading false rumors could result in legal action, and that as a free black woman, her testimony would not be credited over white witnesses. They reminded her that being labeled a troublemaker could have severe consequences. Pearl stopped talking. Demdi, Isaac's request, presented a more complex problem. He approached Helena wanting to see his sons more often, wanting them to know who he was. The cottage had served its purpose, and he had fulfilled his part of the arrangement. But watching his children from a distance while they called him sir was becoming unbearable. Helena met with him again in Edmund's study. She reminded him of the agreement, freedom for himself and his children, but only if the secret remained intact. She explained that allowing the children to know their parentage would lead to exposure, which would destroy their futures. The children would lose their legal status and could be re-enslaved if the circumstances of their birth were revealed. Demdi Isaac argued the children deserved to know the truth. Helena countered that truth would destroy them. She offered a compromise. Isaac could work near the main house, could be present during outdoor activities, could become a familiar figure even if they never knew their true relationship. She also reminded him with cold clarity that she still held the power to void the manumission agreement if he violated terms. It was a threat wrapped in practical discussion. Isaac had no legal recourse. If he pushed too hard, he would lose everything. He accepted Helena's compromise. But the acceptance came at a cost. The overseer's reports note that Isaac became withdrawn, working mechanically but without previous focus. He stopped social interactions with other enslaved people. He spent evenings alone, and on several occasions was observed sitting outside late at night staring toward the main house. Meanwhile, the boys were growing. By Ichem Babai Wushar, they were developing into the heirs Helena had envisioned, but maintaining the deception required constant vigilance. The daughters lived with their children, but the strain manifested differently in each one. Virginia threw herself into household management. Caroline became deeply religious. Elizabeth withdrew into reading. Margaret developed chronic headaches. Catherine took long, solitary rides. Sarah seemed to age beyond her years. They rarely spoke among themselves about what they had done. The silence became its own prison. Richard Yancey became increasingly curious, making additional visits with pointed questions. He began documenting observations in letters to a cousin who worked in the state attorney general's office. His letters revealed growing suspicions about the 6 boys' origins. Helena learned of Yancey's investigation through her lawyer. She invited him to a formal dinner in December, Ichen Babai Wushersus. During the dinner, Helena acknowledged in carefully worded language that the situation at Ravenswood was complex. She suggested Yancey's investigation could expose matters that would harm not only her family but Virginia society more broadly. She offered him substantial money in exchange for silence. Yancey refused, stating some matters transcended monetary consideration. Helena's response was chilling. She reminded him that his own plantation operated through enslavement. She suggested that anyone examining Ravenswood too closely might find their own circumstances receiving similar scrutiny. She implied she possessed information about Yancey's affairs he would prefer remained private. Isaac had been a longtime member of the household community, and tensions had been quietly building for years. Eventually, communication between him and the family ceased. In the summer of Ichen Bad Bide Wusherwu, Helena asked Isaac to meet with her. She explained that she was ready to finalize an arrangement they had discussed before, offering him an early release from his obligations, 60 acres of land, and funds to establish himself in another state. Her conditions required Isaac to relocate within a week and avoid future contact with the family. Isaac declined, explaining that he wished to remain in Virginia so he could stay closer to the children he cared about. Helena insisted that his departure was necessary for the stability of the household and presented a revised offer: immediate release, travel arrangements to California, financial support, and a letter of introduction that would help him establish a new life. In return, she asked for confidentiality and permanent relocation, assuring him that the children would be well provided for. Isaac requested a day to think. The next morning, he was gone. His cabin was tidy, his belongings in place, yet he had disappeared without explanation. A brief search was carried out, but no conclusions were reached. The household accepted that Isaac had chosen to leave quietly, though some found the circumstances puzzling. Several family members privately wondered why he had departed so abruptly without taking personal items. Questions continued, but Helena insisted that he had simply decided to move on. When her daughter Virginia pressed for answers, Helena dismissed further discussion, stating only that Isaac had followed his own path. Seemed 3 months later, Dr. Hartwick, who had been close to the situation, passed away. In his final notes, he wrote that he believed Isaac had left voluntarily, but that he regretted not understanding the full story. Planned without Isaac or Hartwick present, the remaining family members were left with only fragments of what had happened. They chose to protect the younger boys from confusion and uncertainty, keeping details vague. The boys grew up and were given excellent educational opportunities. The upheavals of the following decade changed the region, and after Helena's passing in, Ichen Babait Loksersan, the family estate was eventually sold off. Tom Dat, during the final clearing of the property, years later, workers found old remains near the former housing area. The discovery was considered unremarkable, as many unidentified individuals had passed through the region during the era. A brief report was filed and the matter closed. Bendy Caroline later visited the spot and noticed a familiar belt among the old items. Though she suspected a connection, she chose not to reopen the family's painful history. In a letter to Virginia, she wrote, "They found something that reminded me of him. I don't know what to think, but we must protect the boys from the past." Pomdien. In later years, the boys pursued their own paths across the country, seemingly driven by forces they never fully understood. Virginia's son Edmund became a teacher in Philadelphia, dedicating his life to educating black children after emancipation. Caroline's son James became a Baltimore merchant employing both black and white workers. Elizabeth's son Robert became a physician serving New York's poorest communities. Margaret's son Henry became a lawyer defending freedmen's rights. Catherine's son Charles became a social justice journalist. Sarah's son William became a minister preaching redemption and forgiveness. Jan's each seemed to be working towards something, perhaps unconsciously attempting to balance an equation they didn't understand. This drying rave the first, to make right a wrong they couldn't name. Ben's the daughters carried the secret to their graves, dying between Itzen Babai Bashersand, Itzen Julbait Lingsan. Sarah, the youngest, lived to 73. According to her boarding house proprietor, Sarah spent final years in mental confusion, asking forgiveness from someone named Isaac, insisting her son needed to know the truth. Amundus, before death, Sarah wrote a letter to William detailing everything. The arrangement, the cottage, the births, Isaac's disappearance, her belief Helena arranged his murder. She gave it to the proprietor with instructions to deliver it after her death. The proprietor, shocked by its contents, burned it instead. She justified this by saying some truths were too terrible to be spoken. She told William only that his mother left a letter expressing love and asking forgiveness for unspecified failings. The truth began emerging only after all principals were dead. Dr. Hartwick's journals were discovered in Ichen Babai Josh's T. Isaac's journal was found in Ichen Babai Basher Jolt. During cabin demolition, the family's private ledger surfaced in Ichen Jolbait Arsersan. The skeletal remains found in Ichen Babait Tizers were never definitively identified, but circumstantial evidence strongly suggested they were Isaac Drummond's. The boys themselves never publicly acknowledged the truth. If they learned it later, some evidence suggests Edmund did through anonymous letters. They chose silence. They had built lives under the names and stories they'd been given. Exposing truth would destroy what they built. Then one curious detail emerged in Ichen Jobait Wusher's genealogical research. All 6 of Isaac's sons had numerous descendants, and researchers noted the distinctive amber eyes and crescent birthmark appeared across multiple generations. These genetic markers became living testimony to Isaac's existence, physical. Evidence persisting long after documentary evidence was debated and disputed. Isaac Drummond's ultimate fate remained officially uncertain. No death certificate was issued, no burial record listed his name. He remained a runaway whose fate was unknown, a ghost in historical records, present only through inference. The only traces of his verified existence were 6 sons carrying his genetic legacy, the journal hidden beneath floorboards, disturbing documents in archives, and the profound impact his descendants had on their communities. Dombed, the Ravenswood estate declined into ruin. The main house was demolished in Eugenics. By mid-20th century, most people had forgotten the Ravenswood name entirely. Belinda Helena Ravenswood conceived and executed a plan, violating every social boundary of her era. She used power over an enslaved man to achieve her goals, manipulated her daughters into compliance, and kept truth hidden through legal maneuvering, social pressure, and possible violence. She created 6 children who lived entire lives under false identities, never knowing their history or father. Menja, and she did all of it in service of maintaining a plantation that would ultimately crumble anyway. Perhaps the most haunting aspect is how the children became instruments of their own father's erasure, living embodiments of a crime they knew nothing about. Their very existence both testament to and concealment of truth. They carried Isaac's blood, his genetic legacy, his physical characteristics, but were denied his name, his history, his story. The violence done to Isaac continued across generations, a wound that never healed because it was never acknowledged.